He thought his money could buy the truth. Robert Stone, a man whose name was plastered on skyscrapers from New York to London, stood in the middle of the tarmac, smirk firmly in place, watching his terrified ex-wife clutch their son. He had the lawyers, the press, and the private security. He had the custody papers that would destroy her life. He believed he was untouchable, but he didn't know about the single, crumpled photograph tucked inside her passport. A picture so simple, yet so damning, that it wouldn't just lose him the case. It would burn his entire empire to the ground. This is the story of how a billionaire learned that while justice is blind, karma sees everything. The air inside the first-class lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was recycled, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and anxiety. For Sarah Jenkins, it smelled like freedom, though the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue made it hard to enjoy. She sat in the corner of the lounge, her back pressed against the cold glass of the window overlooking the runway. Outside, the world was gray, a typical New York drizzle, turning the tarmac into a sleek, reflective mirror. Inside, Sarah was trying to make herself invisible. She pulled the hood of her oversized beige cashmere sweater up, hiding her blonde hair, which hadn't been washed in 2 days. Beside her, 4-year-old Leo was playing quietly with a plastic airplane, making soft whoosh noises. He was a small boy, with his father's dark, piercing eyes but Sarah's gentle chin. He didn't know they were running. He didn't know that the 3 suitcases piled around them contained everything they owned in the world, or at least everything Sarah could grab in 10 minutes while the security staff was changing shifts at the estate. "Mommy?" Leo whispered, tugging on her sleeve. "Are we going to see Grandma?" Sarah flinched. She forced a smile, her lips trembling. "Yes, baby. We're going on a big adventure. Just you and me." She checked her phone for the 100th time. No notifications, no angry texts, no alerts from the bank. It was too quiet. Robert Stone, CEO of Stone Vanderbilt Holdings, a man who micromanaged his stock portfolio down to the cent, did not suffer silence. If he knew she was gone, the phone should be exploding. Maybe I made it, she thought, a dangerous spark of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe he's still in the board meeting in Tokyo. Maybe he thinks I'm just at the Hamptons house. Flight 1.89 to London Heathrow, now boarding Group 1. The announcer's voice cut through the lounge, smooth and indifferent. Sarah stood up abruptly. "Okay, Leo, that's us. Grab your backpack." She slung her heavy tote over her shoulder, her hand instinctively going to the inner pocket where her passport lay. Inside the passport, folded into a tight square, was the photo. She hadn't looked at it since she found it 3 days ago. Just thinking about it made her stomach turn. They moved toward the gate. The lounge attendant scanned her boarding pass. "Have a wonderful flight, Miss Jenkins." Sarah nodded, keeping her head down. They walked down the jet bridge, the transition from the sterile lounge to the narrow tunnel feeling like walking into a mouth. She needed to be in the air, international waters, British jurisdiction, anywhere but here. They stepped onto the plane. The flight attendant greeted them, pointing them to seats 2A and 2B. Sarah buckled Leo in, her hands shaking so badly she fumbled the latch twice. "Mommy, you're shaking," Leo said, his eyes wide. "I'm just cold, sweetie, just cold." She buckled herself in and stared out the window. The plane was filling up. Every minute felt like an hour. "Close the doors," she prayed. "Just close the doors." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're just waiting on some final paperwork and we'll be pushing back shortly." Sarah exhaled. Paperwork. That was normal. Then, she saw it. Through the rain-streaked window, a convoy of black Cadillac Escalades tore across the tarmac. They weren't airport security. They were distinct, sleek, and menacing. They bypassed the luggage carts and screeched to a halt right next to the plane's front gear. Sarah's heart stopped. She knew that license plate. "RS1. No," she whispered, her voice a strangled choke. "No, no, no." The doors of the lead SUV flew open. 3 men in dark suits stepped out. And then, Robert, he looked impeccable, as always. A charcoal 3-piece Tom Ford suit, not a wrinkle in sight. Despite the rain, he didn't run. He walked with the terrifying casualness of a man who knows the world will wait for him. He pointed a finger at the jetway stairs. Inside the cabin, the flight attendant frowned, pressing her hand to her earpiece. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't come on board." "Oh, I see." She looked pale. Sarah unbuckled her belt. Panic, hot and blinding, flooded her veins. "Leo, listen to me. Whatever happens, you stay in this seat. Do you hear me? Mommy, stay here." There was a commotion at the front of the plane. The cockpit door opened, and the captain stepped out, looking furious but helpless. 2 TSA agents appeared, followed by Robert's personal head of security, a man named Grover who had eyes like a shark. And then Robert stepped onto the plane. The first-class cabin went silent. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He wasn't yelling, he was smiling. That cold, practiced smile that had charmed shareholders and judges alike for a decade. "Sarah," he said. His voice was low, rich, and terrifyingly calm. "You forgot to say goodbye." Sarah stood in the aisle, blocking his view of Leo. "Get off this plane, Robert. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Robert chuckled, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope. "I don't think so. You see, kidnapping a minor is a federal offense, darling." "I'm his mother," Sarah screamed, losing her composure. "I have custody." "Not as of 20 minutes ago," Robert said smoothly. He tossed the envelope onto the seat beside her. It landed with a heavy thud. "Emergency ex parte order. Judge Cornelia Wallace signed it herself. She agreed that your erratic behavior poses an immediate danger to my son. Judge Wallace." Sarah felt her knees go weak. Wallace was known as the Iron Lady of the New York family courts, but everyone in the inner circle knew she played golf with Robert's father at the Creek Club. "You bought her," Sarah hissed. "I expedited the truth," Robert corrected. He stepped closer, invading her space, smelling of sandalwood and power. "Grab the boy, Grover." "No," Sarah lunged, but Grover was faster. He gently but firmly pushed her back into her seat. "Don't make a scene, Sarah," Robert whispered, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "You're already going to lose everything. Don't make me add assault to the list of charges. You'll never see him again." Leo began to cry. "Mommy, Mommy." "It's okay, Leo. Daddy's here," Robert said, his voice instantly switching to a fake, soothing, fatherly tone. He scooped the boy up. Leo kicked and screamed, reaching for Sarah. "Let him go," Sarah shrieked, clawing at Grover's arm. "TSA. Escort Ms. Jenkins off the plane," Robert commanded, not even looking back at the agents. He walked off the jet bridge with Leo screaming over his shoulder, carrying him like a piece of luggage he had successfully reclaimed. Sarah was left hyperventilating in the aisle, the eyes of 20 strangers burning into her. The TSA agents moved in. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Sarah looked at the empty seat where her son had been. She looked at the envelope of legal papers. And then, her hand went to her pocket. The passport, the photo. She stopped fighting. A cold resolve settled over her, freezing the tears on her face. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "I'll get off. But tell Mr. Stone he forgot something." The agent looked confused. "What?" "Tell him he should have checked my carry-on." The holding room at the airport was stark white, illuminated by buzzing fluorescent lights that made Sarah's head throb. They had confiscated her phone, but they had let her keep her bag after searching it. She sat at a metal table, the legal papers Robert had thrown at her, spread out like an autopsy of her marriage. Motion for full custody. Allegations of substance abuse. Flight risk. Mental instability. It was a masterclass in fiction. Reading it, Sarah almost believed she was the monster he painted her to be. That was Robert's gift. He was an architect of illusions. She closed her eyes, and the memories hit her, transporting her back to where the nightmare began. 5 years ago, Sarah was an art curator in Chelsea. She was vibrant, independent, and happy. She met Robert at a charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was the golden boy of New York real estate, charismatic, philanthropic, and devastatingly handsome. He pursued her with the intensity of a corporate takeover. Flowers filled her apartment daily, private jets to Paris for dinner. He listened to her, or so she thought. "You have an eye for the truth," he had told her once, looking at a painting she had selected. "Most people only see what they want to see. You see what's actually there." Irony. Sarah thought bitterly, sitting in the airport detention room. The mask slipped 6 months after the wedding, right after she got pregnant with Leo. It started small. Comments about her weight, suggestions that she shouldn't work because it looked bad for the Stone family image if his wife had a job. Then came the isolation. He fired her friends, claiming they were using her. He moved them to the estate in Greenwich, a fortress of marble and high hedges. By the time Leo was born, Sarah was a prisoner in a gilded cage. But the worst wasn't the control, it was the gaslighting. Robert would do things, move her keys, delete emails, cancel appointments, and then deny it, looking at her with mock concern. "Sarah, darling, you're forgetting things again. Maybe you need to see Dr. Arrington?" Dr. Arrington, the psychiatrist on Robert's payroll. The man who prescribed her pills she didn't need, pills that made her foggy and compliant. The breaking point had come 3 days ago. Robert was hosting a gala at the estate, the Stone Foundation for At-Risk Youth. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Sarah was expected to play the role of the doting wife. She was in the library, looking for a book to read to Leo, when she heard voices in Robert's private study. The door was cracked open. "The deal is done, Judge," Robert's voice. "The account in the Caymans is set up under the shell company." Sarah had frozen. "I appreciate your discretion, Robert," a woman's voice replied. It was distinctive, raspy, commanding. "Judge Cornelia Wallace. But what about the mother? If she contests the zoning laws for the new casino project?" "Sarah?" Robert laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "Sarah doesn't have the spine to contest a parking ticket. Besides, if she ever tries to leave, I have the medical records ready. I'll paint her as a hysterical addict. No court in the state will give her custody." Sarah had backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. He wasn't just controlling her, he was planning to discard her once she became a liability to his new business venture. He was going to take Leo and lock her away in a sanitarium. She had run upstairs, her hands shaking, and started packing. She needed documents, passports, birth certificates. She went to the wall safe in the master bedroom. She knew the code. It was the date of his first $1 million deal. She grabbed the passports, but as she pulled them out, a small, glossy photograph slipped from between the pages of Robert's spare passport. It must have been placed there hastily, forgotten. Sarah had picked it up. At first glance, it looked innocent. A picture of a group of men on a yacht, laughing, holding drinks. Robert was in the center, looking tan and victorious. But Sarah's curator eye, the eye that saw the truth, caught the detail in the background. Behind the men, reflected clearly in the sliding glass door of the yacht's cabin, was a table. And on that table were lines of white powder, a distinctive gold-plated pistol, and a stack of folders. Sarah had squinted, bringing the photo closer to the light. The folders were labeled. The text was reversed in the reflection, but legible. "Project Skylark," she gasped. Project Skylark was a rumor. A massive, illegal urban development scheme involving bribing city officials to condemn low-income housing so Stone Holdings could buy the land for pennies. It was the kind of scandal that resulted in federal prison time. But there was something else. Next to the gun, reflected in the glass, was a face looking out from the cabin. A face that wasn't supposed to be there. A face of a prominent city official who had gone missing 2 years ago, presumed dead. Robert wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was involved in something much, much darker. Sarah had shoved the photo into her own passport, realizing its worth. It was leverage. It was a nuclear bomb. Back in the airport interrogation room, the door opened. A lawyer walked in. Not her lawyer, she didn't have one. A court-appointed attorney, a young man named David Chen who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Mrs. Stone," David said, sitting down and opening a file. "I'm here to represent you in the preliminary hearing regarding the emergency custody order. I have to be honest with you. It doesn't look good." "It's Jenkins," Sarah said, her voice steel. "And I don't care how it looks. I need to see a judge. Not Wallace. A different judge." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "We don't get to pick the judge, Sarah. And Judge Wallace has fast-tracked this. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Robert's lawyers are claiming you attempted to abduct the child to a non-extradition country. They have flight logs, your ticket purchases. They have a solid case. They have a story," Sarah corrected. "I have the truth." "Truth doesn't always win in family court," David said gently. especially when the other side has stone money. Sarah leaned forward. Robert thinks I'm just a scared mother. He thinks I'm the weak woman he created, but he forgot who I was before I met him. I look at details, David. And I found one. She lowered her voice, looking at the security camera in the corner of the room. I have evidence. Not just about the custody. About everything. David looked skeptical. What kind of evidence? The kind that requires the FBI, not a family court judge, Sarah whispered. But I can't go to the police here. Robert owns them. I need you to get me into that courtroom tomorrow. I need to face him, and I need you to make sure the press is there. The press? David frowned. Family court is usually closed. Not for Robert Stone, Sarah said. His ego demands an audience. He'll want the world to see him, save his son from the crazy ex-wife. He'll invite them. And that will be his mistake. David studied her for a long moment. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, but he also saw the fire. He closed his folder. Okay, David said. I'll file a motion to contest the emergency order immediately. We'll be in court at 9 a.m. But Sarah, if you're bluffing, if you make a scene without proof, you will lose Leo forever. You know that, right? Sarah touched her pocket where the photo burned against her hip. I know, she said. But Robert Stone is about to learn that you can't buy karma. The night before the hearing, New York City did not sleep, but Sarah Jenkins felt as though she were the only one awake in it. David Chen had managed a small miracle, arguing for her release on her own recognizance by leveraging the fact that she had no prior criminal record and had technically surrendered at the airport. But it was a hollow victory. She was barred from the Stone estate. She was barred from contacting Leo. She was staying in a budget hotel near the courthouse on Center Street, a room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, a stark, humiliating contrast to the Egyptian cotton sheets and silk drapes she had woken up to for the last 4 years. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the room illuminated only by the neon sign buzzing outside. Vacancy. It flickered, casting a rhythmic, red pulse across her hands. In those hands, she held the passport. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The image was burned into her retinas. She thought about the man in the reflection of the photo. Councilman Peter O'Malley. 2 years ago, O'Malley had been the loudest voice opposing the Stone Seaport redevelopment project. He had argued that Robert's plan to bulldoze 3 blocks of historic affordable housing was predatory. Then, one Tuesday, O'Malley's car was found abandoned on the George Washington Bridge. The police ruled it a suicide. The city mourned, the opposition crumbled, and Robert's project broke ground a month later. But in that photo, taken 3 months after the funeral, O'Malley was alive. He was sitting in the cabin of Robert's yacht, the Titan, sipping scotch next to a stack of cash and a blueprint. He hadn't died, he had been bought. And the gun on the table suggested the price of his silence was enforced by more than just money. Sarah shivered, pulling her thin cardigan tighter. She wasn't just fighting a custody battle. She was holding a grenade that could blow up the city's political infrastructure. If she used it, she became a target for people far more dangerous than divorce lawyers. If she didn't use it, she lost Leo. There was really no choice at all. Across town, in the penthouse of the 432 Park Avenue Tower, Robert Stone was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city he treated as his personal game board. He swirled a glass of 1942, Don Julio, the amber liquid catching the light. The room was vast, minimalist, and cold. "The press release is ready, sir," said Grover, his head of security, who stood by the door like a gargoyle in a suit. "Read the headline to me again," Robert said, not turning around. Grover cleared his throat. "Billionaire CEO rescues son from abusive mother in airport standoff." We have the Post and the Daily Mail running it exclusive at 6 a.m. Robert took a sip, a satisfied smile touching his lips. "Excellent. And the medical records? Dr. Arrington has backdated the files as you requested. They show a 2-year history of manic episodes, paranoia, and refusal to take prescribed medication. We also have the testimony from the nanny. The nanny, who just received a $50,000 bonus," Robert noted dryly. "The very same." Robert turned, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. Sarah thinks she's playing a game of emotions. She thinks if she cries hard enough, the judge will pity her. She doesn't understand that court is not about truth. It's about architecture. You build a reality, brick by brick, document by document, until the other person simply has no room to stand. He walked over to the fireplace, where a fire crackled behind a glass screen. "She's going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow expecting a fight," Robert whispered. "Instead, she's going to find a slaughter." Back in the hotel room, Sarah's phone, a burner David had bought her, buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Drop the motion. Take the settlement. Or the photos of you from college get released. You know the ones." Sarah stared at the screen. The threat was vague, likely bluffing about some party photos from 15 years ago, but it was designed to rattle her, to make her feel watched. She typed nothing back. She turned off the phone. She laid down, curling into a ball, and closed her eyes. She visualized Leo's face, the way his nose crinkled when he laughed, the weight of his small hand in hers. "I'm coming, baby," she whispered to the empty, red-lit room. "Mommy is bringing the thunder." The morning of the hearing was gray and suffocatingly humid. The steps of the New York State Supreme Court building were slick with mist. But that hadn't stopped the circus. As Sarah's taxi pulled up, her stomach dropped. There were satellite trucks, dozens of photographers, a sea of reporters jostling for position. Robert had made good on his promise. He had turned a private tragedy into a public spectacle. "Keep your head down, Sarah," David Chen said, sitting beside her. He looked younger today, his suit slightly ill-fitting compared to the sharks they were about to swim with. But his jaw was set. "Do not engage, do not cry, do not scream. They want a picture of crazy Sarah. Don't give it to them." They opened the door, and the flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. "Sarah, is it true you tried to kidnap your son? Miss Jenkins, are you off your meds? Did you hit the nanny?" The questions were shouted like accusations, designed to provoke. Sarah felt the heat of the camera lenses on her skin. She fixed her eyes on the heavy brass doors of the courthouse and walked. She didn't run. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, channeling every ounce of dignity she had left. Inside, the courtroom was a cavern of mahogany and marble, smelling of old paper and judicial indifference. It was surprisingly full. Robert's legal team occupied the right table, a phalanx of 5 lawyers in matching navy suits, looking like a corporate board meeting. And there was Robert. He sat in the center, looking devastatingly sad. He wasn't wearing his power suit today. He was wearing a soft gray sweater over a button-down shirt, no tie. He looked like a grieving father, a man weary from the burden of caring for a sick wife. It was a costume, perfectly curated. When Sarah entered, he looked at her. He didn't sneer. He offered a small, pitying nod. It was the most violent thing he could have done. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Cornelia Wallace swept into the room. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair cut into a severe bob and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She didn't look at Sarah. She looked at Robert, and for a split second, Sarah saw a flicker of recognition, a nod that was barely there. "The golf buddy," Sarah thought. "The co-conspirator. We are here for the matter of Stone v. Jenkins," Judge Wallace said, her voice raspy. "Given the urgency of the ex parte order filed yesterday, we are foregoing standard opening formalities. Mr. Walsh, you speak for the petitioner." Preston Walsh, Robert's lead attorney, stood up. He was a man known in legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway. He didn't use notes. "Your Honor," Walsh began, his voice baritone and smooth, "we are not here today to cast stones. We are here to save a life. Robert Stone has tried for years to help the respondent. He has paid for the best doctors, the best facilities. He has covered up her outbursts to protect their son's privacy." He walked over to the exhibit table and picked up a thick binder. But yesterday's events at JFK Airport were the final straw. Miss Jenkins, in a state of chemically induced mania, removed Leo Stone from his home, disconnected his tracking devices, and attempted to board a one-way flight to London with no luggage, no plan, and no consent. This was not a vacation. This was an abduction fueled by psychosis. Walsh turned to look at Sarah, his face a mask of sorrow. "We have submitted Exhibit A, Dr. Arrington's psychiatric evaluation diagnosing Miss Jenkins with severe borderline personality disorder with paranoid delusions. Exhibit B, The toxicology report from 6 months ago showing opioids in her system. And Exhibit C, a sworn affidavit from the family nanny stating that Miss Jenkins frequently forgot to feed the child and once left him in a bathtub unattended for 20 minutes. Sarah gasped. "That's a lie," she shouted, standing up. "I never left him. He fired the nanny because she was stealing." "Sit down, Miss Jenkins," Judge Wallace snapped, slamming the gavel. "Another outburst like that, and I will have you removed." David pulled Sarah down by her sleeve. "Sarah, please. Let me work," he hissed. Sarah sank back, trembling. The lies were so specific, so detailed. The toxicology report? She had taken a painkiller once for a root canal, prescribed by her dentist. They had twisted it into an addiction. David stood up. He looked small in the large room. "Your Honor," David said, his voice steady but lacking Walsh's theatricality. "The respondent vehemently denies these allegations. The flight was an escape from domestic control, not an abduction. Miss Jenkins has been the primary caregiver for Leo his entire life. Mr. Stone is absent 80% of the year on business. This sudden concern for the child is a pretext to punish his wife for leaving him." Judge Wallace looked bored. She tapped a pen against her cheek. "Counselor, do you have any medical evidence to refute Dr. Arrington's diagnosis? Do you have an independent evaluation?" We haven't had time, Your Honor." "The papers were served yesterday," David stammered. "We are requesting a continuance to secure an independent psych evaluation." "Denied," Wallace said instantly. "I will not leave a child in limbo while you go doctor shopping. The evidence presented by Mr. Stone is overwhelming and, frankly, terrifying." She looked at Sarah with open disdain. "Miss Jenkins, this court's primary duty is the best interest of the child. Based on the testimony regarding your stability, I am inclined to grant full, temporary custody to Mr. Stone, with supervised visitation only to be considered after a 90-day inpatient rehabilitation program." It was happening. It was happening exactly as Robert had said it would. The walls were closing in. The script was written. Robert was looking down at the table, hiding a smile behind his hand. He had won. He knew it. Sarah felt a cold calm wash over her. The panic evaporated. She realized that playing by the rules of this courtroom, rules Robert had written and paid for, would result in her death. She reached into her tote bag, which sat on the floor between her feet. "Mr. Chen," Judge Wallace said, gathering her papers, "unless you have something substantive to add, I am ready to rule." David looked defeated. "Your Honor, we just ask for—" "I have something to add," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. Judge Wallace glared. "Miss Jenkins, speak through your attorney." "My attorney doesn't know about this," Sarah said, standing up. She bypassed David. She bypassed the bailiff. She walked straight toward the bench. "Objection!" Walsh shouted, leaping to his feet. "Your Honor, restrain the respondent." "Miss Jenkins, step back or you will be held in contempt," Wallace warned, her eyes widening. "You can hold me in contempt," Sarah said, her voice shaking with the adrenaline of a woman with nothing left to lose. "You can put me in jail, but first, you have to look at this." She didn't hand over a legal brief. She didn't hand over a motion. She pulled the crumpled, glossy photograph from her pocket and slammed it onto the judge's elevated bench, right on top of the custody order. The sound of the photo hitting the wood echoed in the silent courtroom. "What is this?" Wallace demanded, looking down with a sneer. "Look closely, Your Honor," Sarah said, locking eyes with the judge. "Look at the man in the reflection, and then look at the date stamp in the corner." Robert, sensing the shift in the air, stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. Whatever that is, it hasn't been submitted into evidence." "It's not evidence for the custody hearing, Robert," Sarah said, turning to face him for the first time. She smiled, but there was no joy in it, only ice. "It's evidence for a murder trial." Judge Wallace looked at the photo. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of her. Her hands, which had been steady and arrogant moments ago, began to tremble violently. She recognized the yacht. She recognized the gun. But most of all, she recognized the face of Peter O'Malley, a man whose death certificate she had personally signed off on during a corrupt inquest 2 years ago. The courtroom fell into a deathly silence. The air pressure seemed to drop. Sarah leaned in, her voice a whisper that the microphones picked up and amplified to every corner of the room. "Now," Sarah said, "ask me again about my mental stability." The silence in courtroom 302 was not merely the absence of noise. It was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on the lungs of everyone present. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the high windows, the only things moving in a room frozen by a single, terrifying image. Judge Cornelia Wallace stared at the photograph. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Her face, usually a mask of imperious boredom, had collapsed into something raw and unrecognizable. Pure, unadulterated terror. In her mind, the courtroom vanished. She was back in that dark, cigar-filled room 2 years ago, agreeing to look the other way on the O'Malley inquest in exchange for a seat on the federal appeals court, a seat Robert Stone had promised to buy for her. She looked at the date stamp in the corner of the photo. It was irrefutable. O'Malley was alive when he was supposed to be dead, and Robert Stone was sitting next to him, the architect of a ghost story. "Your Honor?" Preston Walsh, Robert's lawyer, broke the silence. His voice was tentative, confused. He had never seen a judge look like they had seen a ghost. "May we proceed?" "The respondent is clearly trying to—" "Quiet," Wallace whispered. It was a strangled sound. Robert Stone was no longer leaning back in his chair. He was standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the mahogany table. He couldn't see the photo from where he stood, but he could read the judge's face. He knew every micro-expression of Cornelia Wallace. He had purchased every one of them. And he knew that the look on her face right now wasn't anger. It was the look of a rat realizing the ship is sinking. "I demand to see the evidence," Robert said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its polished charm and revealing the jagged edge of command underneath. He stepped out from behind the defendant's table. "Stay back, Mr. Stone," Sarah yelled. She hadn't moved from the bench. She stood like a statue of vengeance, her fingers still pressing the photo onto the judge's desk. "Bailiff," Wallace suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking. "Clear the courtroom, everyone out, now." "Your Honor." The press has a right to, a reporter from the Times started to shout, sensing blood in the water. "I said, clear the court, this hearing is sealed." "Sealed!" Wallace slammed her gavel down, not with authority, but with panic. She slammed it so hard the wooden head cracked against the sounding block. Pandemonium broke out. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions. The bailiffs moved in to push them back. In the chaos, Robert lunged. He didn't care about decorum anymore. He needed to know what Sarah had found. He needed to destroy it. He reached the bench, his hand snatching at the photo. But Sarah was faster. She snatched it back, clutching it to her chest, and spun around to face the gallery, to face the cameras that were being hustled out. "He didn't commit suicide," Sarah screamed, her voice piercing the din. "Councilman O'Malley didn't commit suicide. Robert Stone has him. It's all on the boat." The flashbulbs went off like strobe lights, blinding and chaotic. Robert froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. O'Malley. She knew. The mouse he had tormented, the woman he had dismissed as weak and fragile, had walked into his arena and dropped a nuclear bomb. Grover, the head of security, was suddenly at Robert's side, grabbing his arm with a grip that was too tight to be respectful. "Sir, we need to leave." "Now," Grover hissed into his ear. "Don't say a word. Don't look at the cameras." "She has the photo, Grover," Robert whispered, his eyes wide and unseeing. "She has the Skylark photo." "We can't fix this here," Grover said, physically dragging the billionaire backward. Judge Wallace was already fleeing the bench, disappearing into her chambers without dismissing the case, without setting a new date, just running. The bailiffs finally corralled Sarah, but they didn't handcuff her. They looked at her with confusion, then at the fleeing judge, then at the terrified billionaire. The hierarchy of power in the room had dissolved. David Chen fought his way to Sarah's side. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wide with shock. "Sarah, what did you do?" he shouted over the noise. "What is going on?" Sarah looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling, but her eyes were clear. She looked at the empty door where Robert had been dragged out. "I just burned the cage down, David," she said softly. "I burned it all down. The unraveling of a billionaire does not happen all at once. It happens in stages, like the slow, agonizing cracking of a dam before the flood." For Robert Stone, the first crack appeared in the back of his armored Maybach as it sped away from the courthouse. The rain had started again, heavy sheets of water hammering against the bulletproof glass, isolating him from the world he thought he owned. He sat alone in the back seat. Grover was in the front, speaking into a headset in hushed, urgent tones. Robert pulled out his phone. He dialed Judge Wallace's private burner number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed the police commissioner. Voicemail. He dialed the senator he had hosted in the Hamptons last weekend. Voicemail. A cold, creeping sensation started at the base of his spine. The silence was absolute. These were men and women who usually picked up on the first ring, terrified of keeping Robert Stone waiting. Now, they were ghosts. They had seen the news. The headline was already breaking on Twitter, trending worldwide within minutes. Number Stone scandal, number O'Malley alive. Grover, Robert said, his voice trembling slightly. Take us to the airfield. Prepare the Gulf Stream. We're going to the Caymans. Grover didn't answer. He didn't turn around. The car continued moving, but Robert realized with a jolt of horror that they weren't heading toward the airport. They were heading uptown, toward the Federal Plaza. Grover? Robert barked. I gave you an order. Grover finally looked in the rearview mirror. His shark-like eyes were devoid of the loyalty Robert had paid for. I can't do that, Mr. Stone, Grover said flatly. My contract covers security. It doesn't cover international flight from federal prosecution. And I'm not going to prison as an accessory. I pay you $3 million a year, Robert screamed, slamming his hand against the leather partition. I own you. You paid me, Grover corrected. But the accounts were frozen 10 minutes ago, sir. The DOJ just issued a blanket freeze order on Stone Vanderbilt Holdings. Robert slumped back against the seat, the breath leaving his body. The Department of Justice. It was moving too fast. That meant they had been watching. That meant Sarah's photo wasn't just a surprise. It was the missing piece of a puzzle the FBI had been building for months. She hadn't just exposed him. She had handed them the trigger. The car slowed to a halt. They weren't at Federal Plaza. They were at the Stone estate in Greenwich. Why are we here? Robert whispered. House arrest, sir, Grover said, unlocking the doors. Until the warrant is formalized, it's better than a holding cell. For now. Robert stepped out into the rain. The grand limestone mansion, which had always looked like a monument to his greatness, now looked like a mausoleum. The windows were dark. The staff, the maids, the cooks, the gardeners were gone. They had fled the sinking ship. He walked inside. The silence of the 20,000-square-foot house was deafening. He walked into his study and poured a drink, his hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. He sat in his leather chair and turned on the television mounted on the wall. CNN was live. The banner at the bottom read, Breaking News, FBI raids Stone headquarters. The screen showed agents in blue windbreakers carrying boxes out of his office building in Manhattan. And then, the camera cut to a live feed from a press conference. Standing at the podium was the Attorney General of New York. And standing next to him, looking tired but unbreakable, was Sarah. Robert stared at the screen. She was wearing the same cheap sweater she had worn in court. She looked small next to the flags and the grim-faced agents. But when she looked into the camera, Robert felt a phantom blow to his gut. For years, Sarah spoke, her voice steady, amplified by the microphones. I was told I was crazy. I was told I was imagining the things I saw. I was told that money was the only truth that mattered. She paused, taking a breath. But today, I am here to tell you that the truth cannot be bought. Robert Stone built an empire on the graves of the people he silenced. He thought he could take my son. He thought he could erase me. But he forgot that a mother will burn the world to save her child. The Attorney General stepped forward. Based on the evidence provided by Miss Jenkins, including photographic proof of the unlawful imprisonment of Councilman Peter O'Malley and subsequent racketeering charges, we have issued a federal warrant for the arrest of Robert Stone. He is to be considered armed and dangerous. Robert dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, whiskey and shards of crystal spreading across the Persian rug. He looked around the room. The shadows seemed to be lengthening, reaching for him. The walls, lined with awards and magazine covers of his face, felt like they were closing in. He heard a noise outside. Not the rain. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythmic beating of helicopter blades. He went to the window. Spotlights, harsh and blinding, cut through the gloom, pinning him against the glass. Robert Stone, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker, shaking the glass panes. "This is the FBI. Come out with your hands up." He backed away. He ran to his desk, opening the drawer where he kept his emergency passport and a stash of diamonds. But the drawer was empty. He froze. On the bottom of the empty drawer lay a single piece of paper. It was a note, written in crayon. "Be nice to Mommy." It was a drawing Leo had made a year ago. Sarah must have found the stash when she was looking for the passports. She had taken the diamonds, she had taken the escape route, and she had left him with nothing but a drawing from the son he had tried to steal. The front doors blew open with a deafening crash. "Federal agents, move, move." Boots thundered on the marble floors of the foyer. Robert Stone, the man who had touched the sky, sank to the floor of his study. He curled into a ball, clutching the crayon drawing. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because, for the first time in his life, the check had bounced. Karma had come to collect, and the price was everything. 6 months had passed since the raid on the Stone estate, but for Sarah Jenkins, time was no longer measured in court dates or panic attacks. It was measured in the rhythm of the waves crashing against the shore of the small, weathered cottage she now rented on the coast of Maine. Inside the cozy living room, a fire crackled not behind a glass screen in a penthouse, but in an old stone hearth that smelled of pine and salt. Sarah sat on a worn armchair, a cup of tea in her hand, watching the small television in the corner. It was the day of the sentencing. The camera showed the exterior of the federal courthouse in Manhattan. It was snowing, a stark contrast to the humid gray day of the custody hearing. A reporter stood bundled in a scarf, speaking with grave solemnity. "In a historic ruling today," the reporter said, her breath misting in the cold air, "Robert Stone, the disgraced CEO of Stone Vanderbilt Holdings, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The charges, ranging from racketeering and bribery to the kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment of Councilman Peter O'Malley, mark the spectacular downfall of one of New York's most powerful dynasties." The screen cut to footage of Robert being led out of the courthouse. He looked unrecognizable. The Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his gaunt frame. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was gray and thinning. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't smirk. He looked at the ground, a man hollowed out by his own hubris. Sarah didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a quiet, heavy release, like a tightly wound spring finally uncoiling in her chest. The reporter continued, "Former Judge Cornelia Wallace was also sentenced to 15 years for corruption and obstruction of justice." The Iron Lady of Family Court wept openly as the verdict was read. It was over. The monsters weren't under the bed anymore. They were behind bars. Sarah turned off the TV. The silence that followed wasn't scary. It was peaceful. She stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, in the backyard, 5-year-old Leo was building a snowman. He was wearing a bright red coat, laughing as he tried to stick a carrot into the mound of snow. He looked happy. He looked light. He no longer asked why Daddy was angry. He no longer flinched when a door slammed. Sarah touched the cool glass. She thought about the diamonds she had found in Robert's emergency stash, the diamonds she had taken before the FBI arrived. She hadn't spent them on Ferraris or mansions. She hadn't become the thing she hated. Instead, she had sold them anonymously through a broker in Zurich. With the millions raised, she had started a non-profit organization called the Skylark Initiative, named ironically after the project that brought Robert down. But this Skylark didn't destroy homes. It saved them. It provided top-tier legal defense and safe housing for women and children trapped in high-conflict, abusive marriages against powerful spouses. She used Robert's own blood money to ensure that no other mother would ever have to stand alone in a courtroom against a billionaire. It was the ultimate karma. Every dollar Robert had hidden to save himself was now being used to dismantle men just like him. The back door flew open, and a gust of cold air rushed in. Leo stomped his snowy boots on the mat. "Mommy, look, I made a snow fort," he yelled, his cheeks flushed pink. Sarah knelt down and unzipped his coat. "Did you? Is it strong?" "It's invincible," Leo declared, his eyes shining. "Nothing can knock it down." Sarah pulled him into a hug, burying her face in his cold, fresh-smelling hair. She held him tight, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of him in her arms. "You're right, baby," she whispered, tears finally pricking her eyes, tears of gratitude, not fear. We are invincible. Robert Stone sat in a 6 by 8 concrete cell, staring at a blank wall. He had lost his name. He had lost his son. He had lost his empire. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, the woman he thought he could break was rebuilding the world he had tried to destroy, one brick of justice at a time. The karma hadn't just hit back. It had settled the score. And that is how Robert Stone learned the hardest lesson of all. You can buy judges, you can buy silence, and you can buy power. But you can never buy the truth. He underestimated the one force in this world more powerful than $1 billion, the resolve of a mother protecting her child. Sarah Jenkins didn't just survive. She turned her trauma into a shield for others, proving that sometimes the only way to defeat a monster is to drag them into the light. Robert is now serving his 30 years, but the legacy of his downfall is saving lives every single day through Sarah's foundation. Justice was served, not on a silver platter, but on a crumpled photograph. If this story gave you chills, or if you believe that karma always finds a way to address the balance, please hit that like button. It helps get this story out to more people. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have taken the diamonds? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about justice, secrets, and real-life drama, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always comes out. See you in the next one.
Hey, me love. I used to. I used to. Hello, Jean Charles. Listen, have I ever got lost? Everyone has gotten lost, maybe once or twice. Don't worry, if you ever lost, you definitely find your way back. It's okay. if they